Live. Okay, so Brad Pearce, Wayward Rabbler, and we're going to be talking about Somaliland today, which is ostensibly, maybe not ostensibly, I couldn't define that word specifically enough to know if that's the truth, but functionally, it's in independent territory, but it is officially, I guess, part of Somalia. And certain people will know about this, but obviously, Brad does geopolitics. So you want to tell me about this and what we're talking about? This is the your Substack article.
Okay, well, in short, Somaliland is the northern part of the internationally recognized country of Somalia. And in 1991, when the Somali state collapsed, they had already been in revolt for around 10 years. And they declared independence at the time. And since then, they've been functionally an independent nation in basically every way besides international recognition. And in that time, though, there's been some conflict and there's a lot of poverty and whatnot. They've primarily avoided the war and anarchy and everything else that Somalia is known for. And they've done all of this in spite of, or perhaps more likely because of, a lack of receiving a bunch of foreign aid and military aid and everything else. They've really done it all almost completely on their own, which is very impressive. Though, as we can get into. It's probably that not having, the corrupting and, development hindering foreign aid is actually what allowed them to do this, as opposed to, making it a miracle or something.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they've been talking about a lot with the U.S. aid stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of somewhat related. It's like debt diplomacy. They give like predatory loans. There's lots of people talking about this, but yeah, interesting. And the history of this is like Somaliland is mostly the British part. I know this part as well is like contested territory, right?
Yeah, so there's that part in between Somaliland and Puntland is contested, and currently they lost a small conflict there in 2023 against the local clans, and so they've not been controlling part of that border area, and then actually in the west as well, there's been something of an uprising, but not not to that great of an extent. It's very common in Africa that states don't have the greatest amount of control of their territory. Or I mean, even in Mexico or parts of the U.S., the government doesn't have the greatest amount of control of their territory. So yeah, the part that they're claiming as Somaliland is what was British Somaliland, and it was an independent country for 5 days in 1960 before they
Right.
officially joined Somalia. The next year, Somalia changed its constitution from the one that they had agreed on, and Somaliland did not vote to approve it. So according to a lot of activists, they claim that the union with Somalia was never properly ratified and that it's always been an independent country, similar to how the Baltic states claim they were never part of the Soviet Union. I don't really like arguments like that for a variety of reasons, though this one, there's a fair historic and legal basis to this, and the African Union, which is really anti-secession in general, more or less found that their claim was accurate in 2005 or so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it seems stupid to me to try to talk about it in like what's legal terms, because at the end of the day, it's really who has the monopoly on violence, and right now,
Yeah, and
because Somaliland does.
it's their government's position that it's the Somaliland government's position that they declared independence in 1991. It's more activists making the claim that they were never part of Somalia. But yeah, I mean, I would
Okay.
say that the reality is that it is an independent country. It like they collect taxes, they control a pretty stable territory. The amount of territory they pay their military and their civil servants from their own money, not from foreign aid. They conduct
So they collect
international.
taxes,
Yeah, I mean, how else are you going to run a country?
right? Yeah.
uh
Okay.
so they do conduct foreign relations, not with that many people. It's kind of ironic. The U.S. has what's called a one Somalia policy, but it means
Yeah.
in practice it's the exact opposite of the one China policy, where the one China policy is like we only recognize Beijing is controlling both China and Taiwan, but we're going to have really close relations with Taiwan, and it's going to be a protectorate and whatnot. The one Somalia policy is actually what it sounds like it would be, where they only deal with, for the most part, they only deal with Mogadishu, though there's been periodic relations with Somaliland. For example, they used it to the so-called international community used it to imprison Somali pirates because they didn't really have confidence that Somalia could stop them from, like getting broken out and stuff like that.
Wow. So
So
they
they,
trust the Somaliland government more than the Somalian government in that context, at
yeah,
least.
well, it's a lot more stable, and there's not piracy in Somaliland, so they're not infiltrated by pirates and terrorists and everything else.
So why is there no piracy in Somaliland? What's the way different that they run it to where that doesn't happen?
It's just that there's not a vacuum of power, kind of. But I mean, the bigger thing here, I think, is that the criticism that you'll hear from Somalians about Somaliland, or one of them at least, is that it's just a project of one clan. The Isaac, like the name Isaac, is that it's just a project of one clan, and it doesn't represent the other people, which is, it's on a surface level that sounds plausible because it is like 80% Isaac, but one of their presidents was of a minority clan, and like minorities have full legal and political rights, but it is just the population is overwhelmingly, one of the 5 Somali clans, or main Somali clans, and that unity has really helped them win. When Somalia got independent, it was considered to be kind of the only natural homogenous nation in Africa of any size besides, like Lesotho and Eswatini down by South Africa. Those are like little mountain kingdoms that are homogenous.
Yeah.
But
it's like the Brunei of Africa.
Yeah, those little ones are. But yeah, it turned out that the Somalis were even better at killing each other than any of the more diverse countries, basically, besides like Rwanda and Burundi. So, I mean, basically, I think a lot, honestly, of why Somaliland works is because there is one clan is totally dominant, and thus they're not all, fighting each other constantly.
How does the British colonial history like come into account? Because I talked to you about this before, where I think a lot of countries that were run by the British, they tended to use a lot of local leadership, and there's a number of reasons why this would be possible, but like when I think of Malaysia compared to Indonesia, or like Somaliland compared to Somalia, Kenya is relatively well off compared to its neighbors in a lot of ways. Like there's a lot of good examples of this.
Yeah, I mean, that is usually was usually the British method. So Somaliland, actually, they initially took to supply meat to Aden, which they use. They had a protectorate in Aden to cover the entrance into the Red Sea. So that's why they initially took the land, actually.
Oh.
And it was actually the home of one of the most famous revolts against the British Empire. Have you ever hear of the guy they call the Mad Mullah?
No.
Oh yeah, it's just a really famous revolt in Africa in like the early 20th century. It's actually kind of a funny thing. The Somalilanders are kind of really pro-British and really anti-Islamist, So you'll kind of hear them.
I was about to ask about that because
you'll kind of hear them refer to this guy as like a like an Islamist terrorist sort of person, but he's like a folk hero in Somalia itself to a great extent. He was like an anti-colonial uprising sort of guy in general. But anyway,
are they Muslim though?
Yeah. The Somalia is 99% Muslim.
Oh, okay.
They believe their tribe's a descendant of I don't remember the genealogy, but they believe that like all Somalis are a descendant of the great nephew of Muhammad or something like that.
Okay, is it like Shia Islam or Sunni Islam? Is it like, or is it like one of those, but like way outside of it? Because it feels like that mixing with the local culture would produce something quite different.
Yeah, so I don't want to get this wrong, but I'm almost completely sure that they're all Sunni, but there's like 8 schools of Islamic jurisprudence, and so they are kind of not one of the ones that you think of, but I don't remember exactly what they are. Like you can find a map on Wikipedia if you look up like Islamic jurisprudence, but anyway, they're all Muslim and believe that all of the Somalis are descendant from whoever that was related to Muhammad. But the Somalilanders are really, really anti-Islamism in general. They're kind of relatively more secular than the other Somalians are.
Okay.
It's I mean, once again, it just has to do with the fact that their governments ran better. They've not kind of had to rely on Islam to be the only common thread that they have, the way that Somalia has in the time since collapse and other things like that. they also just really want to behave in a way that gets them recognition and makes everyone like them and everything else. So that's also part of it, is just trying to, kind of like impress us, to be honest.
Hmm. And what's like the tribal history when you're saying there's a clan system? How, like, do you know the history of like when Islam comes in there? I assume it's coming from shipping trading routes, and before that, are they nomadic? Am I asking?
I
Might
mean,
be
so
too.
most of Somalia, or most Somalis, are of nomadic heritage. In the southern part here, down in what's like Jubaland, which is below Mogadishu, there, you can actually grow bananas and stuff like that. When Mussolini took over Somalia, his big thing was 1 banana per day per Italian. That's what he was telling them. They were going to get out of the investment into the colony, actually.
Wow.
So there are agricultural lands to the south. Most of the Horn, though, is it's kind of similar to the Australian outback. If you look at it on a map, it's kind of like a wasteland. You pretty much have to be a camel herder to survive there, or be like on the coast fishing. But Somaliland is most likely the land of Punt from Egypt, ancient Egypt. Still, frankincense is one of their main exports. Actually, it's still a big traditional industry there. Myrrh comes from there as well. And so, those are kind of some of the economy that they have going on. But I don't know exactly when Islam arose. The clans do still, they're like the Pashtuns or whatever. They can trace themselves back to a single progenitor or whatever. I believe the Isaac date back to like the 14th century. They said even in like the 1950s, you have to. Somalis are really interesting. Like in the 19th century, a British person said, explorer was there, and he said that like any Somali chieftain has such a strong reputation for poetry that they may as well have like there may as well be like 100 years of literary journal articles about his poetry. It's like every like social leader was known for his literary skill, individual things about it. And kids that were 10 years old were supposed to know their direct male line 10 to 20 generations back. So,
Wow.
it's like in the Iliad or, the Bible or whatever, when, there's the huge list of names, like that culture carried on there much longer than we think of it in other places. And of course, then they have these insanely like, Byzantine complicated, clan disputes about whatever that, date back longer than you can possibly imagine. It's a very complex society.
Yeah. That type of reliance on oratory skill is very common with like horticulturalists and like hunter gatherers, but they would be not. I would have to spend too much time Googling stuff to like get an idea of what their industry was.
They're camel people. Somalis own more camels per capita than anywhere else in the world.
Okay.
And so you look at like here, a lot of this land's only good for camels. So the other side of this, there's this area called the Hod Reserve that's on the Ethiopian side. That basically it was always internationally recognized Ethiopia, but the British occupied it during the war when Ethiopia was occupied by Italy. And then they ultimately gave it back in 1948. And then the Somalis got really upset about this, and the British tried to buy it back from Ethiopia unsuccessfully. So the Somalilanders really want that land back from Ethiopia. It's traditional Isaac grazing land, though it's not clear to me why it matters that much, because they just cross the border and graze there anyway. And it's like the Somali territory of Ethiopia. And, it is Isaac that live there. So like they have access to it under traditional Somali law or custom or whatever. They just cross back and forth with their camels the way that nomads do.
Oh, right. Yeah. There's lots of examples of that in history. And they're related to the Ethiopians somewhat culturally, but how close is that culturally and genetically? I think I don't know how close.
Well, so that's a really complicated question.
And politically charged,
so there's the Amhara is kind of what you would the most think of Ethiopians as being. Those are the Christian ones that historically consider themselves white, no matter what their skin color is. That's like what Haile Selassie was, etc. And so those they're probably not that closely related to, but a lot of Ethiopia is the Somali territory. They call it the Ogaden. So the Somali flag has 5 stars on it, and that represents the five basically different countries that Somalis were under at the time, which is the Northeastern Territory of Kenya, Italian Somaliland, British Somaliland, Ethiopian Somali Territory, and then French Somaliland, which is Djibouti now. And they're really, you wouldn't even call it revanchist because they didn't ever have it, but Somalia is very much like an ethno-state that considers that considers Mogadishu to be the government of all Somalis wherever they are, which is part of why they take so much offense at Somaliland wanting independence, despite their, demonstrable inability to rule it, or like take it over or whatever. But so as far as Somalis in the Amhara, which I don't think they're particularly closely genetically related, but they in Ethiopia, that's a really complicated question, because in the 70s and stuff like that, it was very common to say that Amhara was just what an Ethiopian was being Amhara, or alternately that Amhara was just a noble class within Ethiopian society. And that's kind of changed after the 1991 after the Derg, which was what the communist military coup or junta was called, was overthrown in 91. They set up an ethnic federation, kind of like Yugoslavia. And since then, Amhara has been its own state, and it's made Amhara way more of an ethnicity than it was. So the idea previously that to be Amhara was just Ethiopian has kind of faded, and now they're broken up into, there's three main tribes: the Somali, the Amhara, and the the Tigrayans, that's fourth, and there's a fourth main one that I feel really bad at. I'm blanking on the name of now.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Tigray and now the Amhara. They might just be related in a sense of like I think it's I forget the term, but it's like a step above haplogroup. Like there's only like one in Asia, one in Europe, and then there's like 5 in Africa because it's much more genetically diverse.
The old-timey like race science of like 100 years ago said that the Somalis were a Hamitic race, whatever that means.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that type of stuff is like, there's a few differences, but there's some connections to that, and I think that is what would be called also Chumash, or not Chumash. It's there's some other word for it. It's I had to learn it when I was reading a 19th century book.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, there's a CH word that means the same thing. But yeah, so I did not know that Djibouti was also Somali. And
Djibouti is about 60% Somali. It's it was only, the French only took it to be able to guard the Bab el Mandeb or whatever passage into the Red Sea, and it wasn't released until from French colonialism until 1979. They held it 20 years longer than their other colonies, because it's it's a little thing to protect a shipping lane, and very few people lived there at the time. They basically had a wall around the city of Djibouti, a fence to keep the nomads out, and then they had like a French quarter, an African quarter, and it was considered just an absolutely miserable, awful city in general. And then they got their independence, and so that's it's about 60% Somali.
Okay, sweet. And this is the way that like somebody thinks about their ethnicity. They're not completely tied to like fact in genetics or with shared language.
Well, okay, so firstly, Somali is a language, firstly. So, it's whether or not you speak Somali is one aspect of this. But, the other one is, like, they have this whole complex clan system. So, it is, at least to them, I would say, is very clear whether or not one is Somali.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that doesn't always carry over into an actual, like, cohesive genetic group. Like somebody thinks of their ethnic group as French, but different people in different parts of France are probably a lot more different from each other than they are to somebody in like Belgium. And also that creates a situation where something like the Amhara people can become their own people over time. Like there are schisms in these cultures. Like the
Amhara have been Christian since the 3rd century, and I mean, really, to look at them, they have substantially less like African features than most people. I mean, like their skin is darker, but they have
Oh,
substantially more Middle Eastern or European looking features in terms of their lips and their like hair texture and their face shape and all this other stuff. It's definitely a thing that the Amhara are a lot more European looking.
yeah, I think Caucasian. That's one of those old ones. We're still allowed
Yeah,
to
so
use
the
the white
The
or the
Amhara were
white.
considered Caucasian in the old
Yeah,
timey racial classification, even though
yeah,
and they were really truly believed that they were white regardless of their skin color. And
yeah,
then yeah, like I said, the Somalis are considered Hamitic, even though a lot of Somalis are really dark.
yeah. They're complicated in the way that they're classified changes over time. But there are some people in that area that are the same haplogroup as me, as well as people in
Yeah.
West Africa, R1b, which is like the most common one in Western Europe. It's like 90% in Ireland,
Mm.
and similar in other places. But the perception, if they're perceived, regardless of how true it is or not, and if you say that you are and you push that over time, you will be. And it's not always that ethnicity is like an imperfect term because how people define it really differs. And sometimes there's another classification like your clan, which isn't tied to anything like that, or it is ultimately somewhat, but that's what people miss a lot is like, why can't Afghanistan be a country? And it's like, well, it's because they're not united under one thing.
Well, I mean, also Afghanistan is just like the border between is like the area that was in between the borders of other countries that they didn't go to, kind of the same way that the Congo is. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, the
it doesn't.
Pashtuns are kind of similar to the Somalis in a lot of ways, actually, in terms of I mean, there basically would only be like one clan. But regardless, it's a people that are very interested in their heritage. As I said in my article, they've won the admiration of as many explorers as they have, exasperated administrators. There was one British guy in like 1920 when they were trying to put down the Mad Mullahs uprising that said something like, it's fantastic just how little our superior technology and way of life have impressed these people. Because they won't give in for anything. Like I mean, for example, I actually just watched that Black Hawk Down documentary on Netflix, and I mean, their entire attitude towards being occupied. Like ultimately, they did accept kind of a pro-American government, being in some of it, but just
Yeah,
their
on
general
their own
attitude.
terms
Like one
ultimately.
of the guy was telling me, he's like, I don't care how well trained these Americans are. Like I've been in 20 battles. Like they're kids that just got here. Anyway, this is our country. Like we don't care if 1,000 Somalis die as long as we take one of them and show them their weakness. And he was also saying, like, you say you're a superpower and you think it's a big deal that you lost 20 people. That's pathetic. It's just I don't know. That's kind of their world attitude.
Damn. That's pretty hardcore. You say that you're a superpower and you're all upset you lost 20 people.
Yeah, that guy got
Yeah,
shot in the chest too. Like he had a
yeah.
really gnarly voice, and I was wondering why it was. And he showed this like hole in his chest from taking a bullet. He's like, the pain doesn't actually matter.
Jesus,
Yeah,
dude.
no,
You don't
they're
want
pretty
to
crazy.
take over those people. They killed
Yeah,
like 20 rangers. And
yeah,
then like it was like
yeah,
I
like
know
Delta
that way
Force.
more
Yeah,
Somalis died. Yeah, Rangers and Delta Force. I
Delta
forgot
Ranger
about
Delta.
that.
Yeah,
No, it's both. It's both. It was
it
some
is.
of
Yeah,
Rangers
exactly.
and then some of the others. Some of Delta. Very different groups. Both very, very well trained troops, but very different. Um, yeah, they took a lot more Somalis, but it didn't really matter, did it? It's not like that helps us.
No, I mean, and it also the majority of the male population is addicted to cot as well. So they're like
Oh, somebody was talking about that in the comments. They said they were
yeah,
growing it.
it's it kind of has an impact on your ability to to keep going like that. That's kind of what alarmed all the Americans actually when they got there. Is you saw these people in like really miserable conditions that were sitting there, kind of like mildly stoned, but in a way that made them look like really fierce and like they weren't kind of concerned about anything.
So they were like messed out and sedated.
It's I mean, I've never
Is
having
it?
done it myself, I can't really explain what it's like, but yeah, it's like leaves you chew. That's kind of like a long term stimulant. I think it's grown in the Ethiopian highlands primarily. It's really, really popular in Yemen as well.
Hmm.
So that's the other thing you deal with them. But it's common in these cultures that the men sit around for like hours in the afternoon chewing it.
And they're just like, um,
It's similar to like ephedrine, basically, though.
ephedrine.
Yeah,
I'm trying to look it up. Stimulant-like effect. I wonder if they even know what the. We're getting way off
you
here.
can make something called methcathinone from it that is like a weird type of
Meth.
methamphetamine. Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah. I guess I'm gonna search the active ingredient. Um, Cathinone, an alkaloid that acts as a stimulant. Increased sociability, excitement, mild euphoria, slight loss of appetite. Yeah, it sounds like Adderall, dude. That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't actually know the statistics for Somalia. I know in Yemen, I don't know, something like 70% of men use khat daily. It's common that they spend like 20% of their disposable income on it, which they don't have very much of because it's Yemen. But
On the leaves, I can't just pick the fucking
no,
leaves.
I believe it grows in the Ethiopian highlands. It has to be sent across
Oh,
the
right.
sea to Yemen. But yeah, I am not sure. I guess exactly where you get it. I think it's almost all produced in Ethiopia, though.
Yeah, okay. But it's like shared. That's interesting. Yeah, I did some stuff. I gotta make some more content on it, like how different cultures have different drugs in line. Like we take pills because we're like an industrial society. They like different levels of
Yeah,
processing and
it's not
different
terribly
types.
different from the Andean people, chewing coca leaves all the time.
Yeah, I mean I've got a stimulant in right now as well. I have a
I'm
freaking
drinking mate myself. Yeah.
yeah, and I have a Zin in. We're all doing it. You have to chew it for hours to get a strong effect. This guy freaking what? Did you say you grow it? Yeah, you do.
Yeah,
It's illegal in the U.S. and I grow it.
They sit around for hours at a time. They have with the bigger population of Somalis. They've caught it coming into the U.S. at least a few different times because people in the Somali community wanted it or whatever, so that they imported it. But yeah, in general, the men might sit around for 4 hours an afternoon doing this.
I want to get into the Trump thing too.
Yeah.
It's not as dangerous as the media portrays, and the cathinone degrades quickly, so the leaves have to be fresh. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's there's not really any evidence that anyone over there like dies from it or anything. It's just more Somalis can be kind of scary looking anyway, especially when they're like sitting in the dust holding an AK and they're just, chewing on this, just like
And then
staring at you
yeah.
and you're trying to occupy their country. So it just kind of, the vibe was just strange to the soldiers coming in, I guess is more what I was saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that would scare you. I'm sorry, I get interested in what drugs people are doing in different parts of the country. Might get this one demonetized, but that's fine.
I mean, this is anthropology, right? This is a major part of
Yeah.
Somali culture.
Yeah, it is, and I do agree. It's probably not researching it too much. It's probably not as bad as Adderall for kids. Okay, so I want to get into the Trump stuff, but I want to I just getting a good foundation of what's going on here as much as we can in an hour and a half or so. But or I mean, however long you have.
Yeah.
The Ilhan Omar, has she talked about Somaliland?
Not really as such. The Somalilanders really, really hate her.
I bet they do.
She's in general, though, is an advocate of, the one Somalia policy of continuing to give a bunch of money to Mogadishu. But yeah, so the Somaliland foreign minister, vice foreign minister, I don't remember what it was, released a video of her talking to other Somalis with like fake, there were like fake subtitles as well as they had random commentary that was obviously no one would think was a translation. And they got like half of the American right riled up. This was January of 2024. I got all riled up about this because of, how they translated it. And they're like claiming like, oh, they're like being revanchist again. They want to take over Ethiopia and, and Kenya and whatnot. And in reality, what she was describing was more or less the U.S. policy predating her even entering the country, But, they really got them going on because people hate her anyway. So the other thing that I should have said here, actually, is that so from the time Somalia was founded, Mogadishu's government made it clear that they had no intention to respect international borders, that they were going to try to get the Somali parts of Ethiopia and French Somaliland and Kenya into their country. And that also they kept harassing those governments about giving autonomy and stuff like that to Somalis that were living in their country and doing everything to kind of make those people their citizens and stuff like that. And so the Mogadishu government was treated with extreme distrust by everyone around the Horn from the get-go. And then in the 70s, when Siad Barre, the dictator, was in power, he invaded Ethiopia. So what happened is that he had been a communist or communist aligned, whatever, and had all these arms from the Soviets. But Ethiopia had also then been under the Derg, which was like a communist coup, like junta. And so basically the Soviets switched sides when Somalia invaded Ethiopia, and they took Ethiopia's side, and they just absolutely devastated Somalia in that conflict, the Ogaden conflict. It went on from 74 to 76 or something like that. And so then they retreated. That's kind of also when the Isaacs started rebelling in Somaliland. And they more or less, once the dream of a greater Somalia was dead, all of the clans turned on each other. Like that's what had been holding them together, was like the idea that we're going to take over the Horn. It would also make Somalia, like, instead of a 7, it would be like a line kind of straight down there is what would make it all of the Somali territory Somalia. And they kind of all turned on each other after that. And then we should mention, I didn't say it before, by the late 80s, unable to put down this rebellion. By the way, Ilhan Omar's father was in the Somalia army at this time, the Somali army. He should not have been allowed to immigrate into the United States as a refugee because he was implicated in an army that was committing severe war crimes.
What?
Yeah. This is a fact, by the way.
Oh,
this is not really speculation. I mean, I don't know just how personally implicated he was, but he was a colonel in this army when much of the country was in revolt.
God, so then her brother's dad was too. That's insane.
Yeah, so in the 80s, in the late 80s, they launched on explicitly exterminationist policies against the Isaac that is known as the Isaac genocide. They perhaps killed, or the ultimate death toll was perhaps as many as 250,000 people, though 50 to 100,000 is considered more common. At times they called it, at the time, some people called it the Bashau of Africa or whatever. They destroyed I think 80% of Hargeisa and 90% of the whatever the other biggest city in Somaliland is, which were the second and third biggest cities in Somalia. They completely destroyed them with heavy weaponry and airstrikes and stuff, and just mass killed them. So the SNM, I believe you call it, the Somaliland National Movement, was not actually explicitly secessionist in the 80s. They were just in rebellion against the dictator of the country, But after that happened, then they became completely secessionist and, broke free when the dictator fell.
Yeah, well, good God, yeah. That's insane.
It's a crazy place.
Yeah. Yeah, and then Somaliland, I'm looking at it here. No, Somalia had Rhodesian and South African mercenaries. That's weird.
Is that, where does it say that?
On Wikipedia, so.
Oh, yeah, I mean, various people were, South African and Rhodesian mercenaries kind of served everywhere at various times. I didn't actually know that specifically, but I'm not surprised.
That's all it says, though. Oh, no, it says 60,000 and then numerous South African and Rhodesian mercenaries.
Yeah, I believe that.
I would have to read more of this right here to figure out what this means, but civilians is counted in their strength. Good Lord.
Yeah, well, every Somali's a warrior. They're a warrior people, so every man is a warrior of sorts.
Kind of makes you not a civilian at that point, though.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. Anyway, even the Somaliland National Movement or whatever, that SNM, I believe I have that correct, was actually kind of democratic even when it was in rebellion in terms of how they picked their leaders and changed them regularly and everything else. It's really is something how the British managed to impart a good deal of British values about how to run things on them compared to the Somalians, or the Somalian is always incorrect, and this is part of the thing about the Mogadishu government thing. It's a government of all Somalis, so you are supposed to call their nationality Somalis. It just gets really confusing if you don't call them Somalians. Anyway, something very strange about the Somalilanders is that they're like really proud of their British heritage, and there's like pretty much no one else you will talk to in Africa that is proud of who their colonial power was, compared to the rest of Somalia having been under the Italians.
Right. Right. Yeah. So is that like a thing where it's like we're better because we fell to the better power, or is it like they made us
And they
better
were
than
governed
them?
better. I mean, and then the Somalians are like, what is wrong with you being proud of your colonial heritage? That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, if they're better off, and then they see what the result is of the other people that they now hate, right?
Well,
It kind of
I
makes
mean,
sense.
Somaliland is actually a lot poorer than the rest of Somalia, especially than the
Oh,
Mogadishu area. But it's also, if you look at it on a map, it is much worse. And, it's basically like all badlands, and they
yeah,
haven't got a bunch of corrupt foreign aid, pouring into their country all the time. So, like,
yeah,
it is just kind of a naturally poor region. But a lot of the other things about building up a state, like that their education rates are really low, and various things have not gone well. But it's like also hard for them to get trade agreements with people, to get foreign direct investment, to all these other things like that.
yeah. It's
When
a
they're
very
unrecognized.
American spirit, to be honest. They're just like, no, screw you. Like, we don't care. We're gonna do it. We're gonna
Yeah,
do
we're
it. We
gonna
don't
go our own
care
way.
how bad it is. We're gonna do our own thing. We're gonna have freedom, which you kind of I saw in the guy talking earlier, but that was a Somalian,
I mean,
not a
it really is the
Somalilander.
only like long-standing unrecognized state in the world that does not have a very specific sponsor. Like, you
Yeah,
have like Taiwan sponsored by the U.S. and relations with other countries. Taiwan and Somaliland are really close allies, by the way.
I bet they are. Yeah,
Yeah, like
similar
so
situations.
Somaliland doesn't recognize the PRC as the government of China, actually.
Huh. That might be
Uh,
part of why they're.
well, yeah, no, I
That I
mean,
was
I'm,
about
I'm
to
not
ask
even
about
joking.
China,
Like,
actually.
Somaliland recognizes Taiwan as the legitimate government of all of China.
Wow.
Anyway, but you look at like the Artsakh Republic, or South Ossetia and Abkhazia, or even Transnistria or whatever. All of the other ones like this have all the other ones like this have some sort of sponsor, and they don't. I'm just reading that comment. Yeah, I mean, it's really like the One Somalia policy is a total failure, and it has brought in all of this corrupt money into Mogadishu, which is the main thing they're all holding on to. Like, 2/3 of the Somali legislature are dual citizens, and they go back there to serve for 2 to 4 years or whatever, like you would join the Peace Corps or something.
Wow.
And they are in cliques within their legislature based on which country of dual citizenship with. So, like, the largest group is the British ones, the second largest is Americans, and then a fair amount of them are in like Scandinavia and a few other countries. And so
Wow.
they come. Not that many of them have real skin in the game. It's not as bad as like the Americans don't really leave the Mogadishu airport generally. That's where their embassy is. And so it's like they're not as bad as like the green zone in Iraq, but unlike the actual people that are stuck there without dual citizenship, the great majority of their legislature can basically leave when they're done serving some years in there. It's crazy.
Wow. That's really bad for a country.
Yeah, the president gave actually I can't remember if it's the current or the former president, but did give up his American citizenship to serve as president, but plenty of the legislature doesn't.
Hmm. Gosh, so is it just like patronage stuff then? Is it just like they're just trying to get money essentially? Like, or do some of them actually care about Somalia still?
They all still like dream of putting this country back together, but it's not really going anywhere. Um, and yeah, it's rated the most corrupt country on earth. They say Somaliland's also really corrupt. It's difficult to know because there's not separate ratings for them. So Somaliland would like kind of count in that rating, I guess. But regardless, it's listed by like Transparency International, which of course is like a Soros NGO or whatever, as having the highest level of corruption on earth. And that has to be why they're so set on keeping the central government so strong. Well, it's not strong, but they're set on this idea of having a strong central government, despite that it demonstrably does not work. And it
Yeah.
has to be so that all the money keeps going through Mogadishu. Because like also, so Puntland up there unilaterally declared internal autonomy, but without claiming independence. and that was in like 97. And it's like a little bit better there, though they do have terrorism there.
Oh,
but it's a little bit better than the rest of Somalia in terms of stability. And they withdrew recognition of the government in a dispute over the constitution. Jubaland in the south kind of got carved out of it, and they just in December the Somali National Army lost a battle against their troops and had to like go fleeing into Kenya or whatever. And that was over. So Puntland withdrew recognition over changes to the Somali National Constitution, but Somalia, the Mogadishu government refused to recognize changes to the Jubaland Constitution, which is what they were fighting about. So, like, really, yeah, the amount that the Mogadishu government controls properly and directly is really quite small.
Yeah, and seems like it's shrinking. Wow. All right. So, how does Trump play into this? What does Trump have anything to do with this? Why does Trump care?
So, for one thing, the Somalilanders have just specifically been lobbying the Republicans for a long time. That was kind of the strategy that they went with, was like, we're going to choose this like one faction. The big thing is that Democrats are the ones that are, as we can see with the whole USA thing, that are really, really set on continuing these failed humanitarian policies. Clinton started this. They put in the Somalian federal government. They changed it to like the permanent government from the transitional government to distract people from Benghazi. So that was done in 2011, 2012, whatever. So the Democrats have always kind of owned this anyway, the whole mess that's there. And the Republicans are more on the side of like of realism to at least some extent now. And then the two main Republican African people are this guy named J. Peter Pham, who's this big fat Vietnamese guy who's like an Africa specialist, and he's a huge Somaliland partisan. It's totally unprofessional.
Yeah,
in terms of not acting with an even hand like he should. And then also this other guy, Tibor Nagy, who's a Hungarian-born U.S. diplomat. That guy's actually interesting. He has triplets.
So is the other guy Vietnamese American, like born here, or is he also Vietnamese born like the Hungarian guy?
Peter Pham, as far as I know, was born in the U.S.
Well, his name's Peter, so that probably answers it.
Yeah, J. Peter Pham, but he's of such an age that his parents would have came over as refugees or whatever. He's probably 50 or something. So he was probably born shortly after they got here. Tibor Nagy was born in Hungary, and he's kind of interesting. His triplet sons, and they were the first triplets born in independent Zimbabwe. It's just a random fact about that guy. He was a State Department African guy for like 25 years.
It's Nagy.
What?
It's one of the most common names in Hungary.
Oh yeah, sorry, I've never known how to pronounce it. I guess you're part Hungarian.
I might have mispronounced it anyway, but yeah, it's Nagy. This is like Smith in Hungarian.
Okay, yeah. So that guy was in the State Department in Africa forever. J. Peter Pham still has not actually been given a proper position in the Trump administration for just they've been so busy appointing all these other people, but in the previous Trump administration, he didn't get in because, Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma was just randomly a massive partisan of the, those people in the Western Sahara, the Polisario Front or whatever.
I've actually never known specifics besides it's like freaking pirate.
There's like the berm there. Maybe you don't.
No, I do. I know Western Sahara is like just sandy nothingness that is
okay. So there's a whole Moroccan controlled area, and then there's a berm in it that is like just this tiny edge of it that's almost really sparsely inhabited. There's what's called the Polisario Front there, that is the natives that are in war with the Moroccan government. This Oklahoma senator Jim Inhofe was randomly a massive partisan of the Polisario Front, even though they're like a communist African revolutionaries, basically. And this Republican senator was just incredibly close to them. So he blocked Peter Pham getting in last time because of a disagreement about those people, basically, which is just random. But he's not in the Senate anymore.
What? Okay.
He just retired because he was old. But yeah, it's a weird random thing that a lot of people find to be a funny fact that this, really, really far right conservative senator was a huge supporter of this random like rebel group in Africa, basically.
Yeah.
Um, and so anyway,
Why would you pick that as a pet project?
I just got to know them. Morocco's occupation of Western Sahara is not recognized by anyone, etc. Anyway, so Peter Famil being one of the main ones, Nej, whatever
it's like Naj or
Naj
something. Yeah, it
is
doesn't
the
matter.
Undersecretary of State for Management, whatever the hell that means. But he's in that position at the State Department.
Yeah. But why Trump then?
Basically,
Like anything solid?
it's just that these people they just are the Republican operatives that work with Africa.
So
But
it's
also,
not something that Trump said.
No. So the other thing though is that Jim Risch, the Republican head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who's a senator from Idaho, he's way more professional than these two, but he got a law passed in 2022 that basically obligates the government to work with appropriate partners in the Horn of Africa, essentially, is like what it says, which absolutely means Somaliland. That was the point of it without saying it by name. That obligates them to try to make positive relations with them or whatever. And so the Republican head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is also kind of on side, though he hasn't came out fully in favor of recognizing them. But also Trump's doing this whole. I should also say it's in Project 2025 says to recognize Somaliland. That's one of their 800 points. This other Republican operative named Joshua Maservi, who's at the Hudson Institute now, is also a Somaliland supporter. So yeah, it's in Project 2025, though there's only 2 points about Africa out of 800 of them. But basically, nothing in Somalia is working. We've wasted massive amounts of money. It's going absolutely nowhere. We're still there, dealing with terrorism and piracy and all this other stuff. It's not actually that geopolitically important because you could just go around it. You could just go wide of it if you're in a boat and don't want the pirates to attack you or whatever.
Yeah.
But Somaliland is overseeing the Gulf of Aden. It gives you good access to Yemen, and the stuff there seems to never ending. Yeah. And then also China has a base in Djibouti because Djibouti's policy is that they'll let whoever build a base there. So that was our main.
Yeah, we have a base there too.
And now China has a base just a few miles down the road or whatever, which no one is happy about. And so
yeah.
Berbera in Somaliland is by some ratings, Somalilanders claim this at least, but is rated as the top port in sub-Saharan Africa. They developed it all. There aren't a lot of natural harbors in Africa, and it's a pretty nice little port there. And so they're willing to let them put a base there for recognition. And it's if you think about just Trump's general behavior, he likes to stand up and say, hey, they were stuck with 30 years of failed policies. All of these corrupt bureaucrats were getting kickbacks from it. I was the only one that was willing to do what needed to be done, which puts America first. Because to put a base in Somaliland, it basically costs us nothing besides recognizing the reality that they're an independent country. But it gives you access to a wide region. It guards the the entrance to the Red Sea and all these other things like that.
It's a better location geopolitically.
Yeah, it's And the other thing is the Africa policy as a whole is just an abject failure. It's gone down in flames.
Yeah.
But
besides the few exceptions,
Somaliland relates to our broader maritime interests as opposed to what's going on in the interior of the continent or whatever. It's a good place to, retreat from if we get in trouble in the Middle East. It's to retreat to if we get in trouble in the Middle East. It's in a plain range of all sorts of stuff. So they've just been lobbying the Republicans for a long time, and they think it's going to come to fruition. I'm not confident that Trump is going to recognize Somaliland this year at least, but the Somalilanders are pretty optimistic about it. They were dancing in the streets when he was getting inaugurated.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm looking at this report. I'm trying to source it, but it's the Jerusalem Post. They're saying that Trump said that thing, and look, we can't even get into that. But I just want to say I don't agree with this idea, but Trump did say he like that getting rid of Gazans out of Gaza.
Oh yeah, they're talking
Um,
about sending them to Somaliland, Puntland, or Morocco, like of all the places you could possibly choose.
yeah, yeah, that's insane. I don't know why you do that. I don't know why you think that would work.
No,
Um,
I mean, and Somaliland's really poor. The average income is like $850 a year is the GDP per capita. Though you do have to understand that, I mean, they are genuinely poor, but you have to understand that people in these situations are not wholly living off of cash the way we do. They're living off of,
right.
camel milk and meat and, whatever they can scratch out of farming and fishing and all this other stuff like that. Um, but regardless, it's very poor. I don't know what they would do with a bunch of Palestinians that were put there. It's a totally crazy idea.
It's
Unless I
insane.
mean,
It
this is
makes no
temporary.
sense.
I mean, and they're also talking about Puntland, which has like Al Shabaab, which is like an Al Qaeda affiliate in it. Like you're gonna put all these pissed off Palestinians there to link up with Al Qaeda. Like that's your plan right now. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, apparently a bunch of rabbis said no. And this is part of the greater thing of taking over Gaza. We're getting to that now a little bit, but we'll go back to Somaliland. But I guess a bunch of rabbis and other people, a list of Jewish people said don't no to ethnic cleansing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, you know what Rubio said, even if unworkable, was a lot less messed up because he was just saying, we need to put them somewhere temporarily so that we can rebuild this and then they can come back, which is one thing. But they wouldn't
that's not
believe
going to
that
happen.
nor agree to it. But Trump was saying a totally different thing, like, oh no, they don't need to come back; they'll be living somewhere else that's so great,
Does he
etc.
really believe that? That's
I
crazy.
I have no idea what the hell he believes.
Yeah, and it does sound like the H-Man Madagascar plan. I've never really known if that's true. I don't really do a lot into World War II, but it does sound like as ridiculous, maybe slightly less ridiculous because they're at least the same religion. Like Madagascar is really, really crazy because it's so far away, but and completely different. Um,
Yeah, well, the French tried to exile the king of Morocco there, and then they ended up letting him stay in. Maybe it was in Djibouti that they ended up letting him stay.
the King of
uh or
Morocco.
Egypt.
Wow.
Yeah, this is in like 1950 or something.
What?
They tried. Yeah, well, it was like a dependency, and so the way that the lie of Moroccan independence was working, because Morocco was always an internationally recognized independent state, but it was completely under French control, was that the king had to sign everything, every law that went through. So the king that they had there stopped signing things. It was like the only power that he had was that they needed his like rubber stamp on things. So then they exiled him, and they were going to send him all the way to to Morocco or to Madagascar, but I believe they left him in Djibouti for a number of years, and then they ultimately let him return because he was like really popular in Morocco. It was nearing the end of their control of North Africa.
Yeah, yeah. That's wild. All right. What else do you have to say about Somaliland and Trump? I think I've exhausted my questions, at least.
Oh, I mean, the main thing that I would say about this is that in my view, you can look at this from a bunch of different angles, from like a global chessboard grand strategy perspective, from what we're spending our tax money on, from keeping shipping lanes open, from all these other things. But the fact of the matter is that Somaliland is an independent country, whether or not people recognize it as such, and it has been for over 30 years. And so, like, I think that they should recognize it because it's reality, not because of any other reason, just because it is true, and it would be one less fiction removed from, it's the whole reality-based community thing from the Bush era, that whatever was said to that journalist, like, oh, we're like the empire, we make reality or whatever, but that's obviously not true. And the reality here is
Hmm.
that it's not possible for the Mogadishu government to take over Somaliland. Even if they somehow did, the people would be instantly in revolt, back in the hills and the scrub lands with their camels and whatnot. Fighting them constantly. It's absolutely never going to happen. So it's idiotic to keep this policy that we just everything. Nothing we've done has helped Somalia anyway. It's just created a really corrupt class of plutocrats in the capital in Mogadishu.
Yeah.
And yeah. So it's a complete dead end. The two things to be concerned about. The first of which is that You don't want a situation like South Sudan where a country becomes independent and then it's in civil war immediately. So you'd want to find some sort of agreement for the people in those eastern territories that have been in revolt, and they set up their own administration that they say is loyal to the Mogadishu government, though it's like a federation or whatever, so they're still more or less self-governing. The Somalilanders are pretty set on their British borders, the colonial borders, but that's partially because that has to do with what their claim is. Like it has to do with like their legal claim is that they're that territory. So I don't know to what extent it's that that they'd be unwilling to negotiate about that so much as that it has to do with their legal argument for independence. But,
Right.
Ideally you'd get the people there to vote on what they wanted to do and then get all of the, stakeholders or whatever you would call them to, agree to go by the results of, of whatever they choose in an election or something. Alternately, it's not really clear to me why they so badly would want to be part of Somalia under the Mogadishu government. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
You could get some sort of agreement out of the parties to just kick the can down the road and, have them have a degree of autonomy within Somaliland because they're not really trying to conduct their own foreign policy anyway. And then there is also the concern about this border dispute with Ethiopia, but Somaliland, the Hargeisa government of Somaliland, has pretty decent relations with Ethiopia. The Ethiopia almost there was speculation they were going to recognize Somaliland because they wanted to use the port so that they weren't reliant on Eritrea or Djibouti. I mean, sorry, I meant to say Djibouti to be able to export things and whatnot. But the kind of what happened there is that firstly, the people that were in there, they were going to lease out like 10 miles of shoreline to the Ethiopians or whatever, and the people in that area revolted. That's the deal that was going on in the west of Somaliland. Oh. And then Erdogan of Turkey, who's a pretty important player in the Horn of Africa, managed to get to reconcile Ethiopia and the Mogadishu government. So then that what memorandum of understanding was what it was called. That kind of collapsed and isn't happening, but realistically, ideally Trump should try to do this in a responsible way, not just in it's the crackpot idea he happens to have that day, so he announced he's doing it, which is obviously Trump's style in general. I mean, fortunately, once again, those guys, Pham and Naja, have their problems, but they do actually understand the situation thoroughly.
I'm sure they do, very, but people get wrapped up in the
I'm saying they are very experienced, so like they do understand what's going on here quite well. But you just want to try to get some of those things sorted before you did this, so that it's not something that just suddenly causes these problems. But they keep saying like, oh, you're gonna like destabilize the Horn, and it's like, dude, it's not really possible for the Horn to be much less stable than it is. But Ethiopia is on the edge of state collapse. It's at risk. I shouldn't say on the edge because you never know when something's going to actually happen or if it's going to happen at all. But Ethiopia is at serious risk of total state collapse after they not only had the Tigray War, they're still at war in the Amhara territory. I'm still not remembering the name of the other main ethnic group in Ethiopia.
My buddy was deployed in Djibouti when the Tigray War was going on.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. My old roommate, actually.
Yeah, anyway, so, you really would not want them to do anything that further destabilizes Ethiopia. So that is definitely an agreement you would want to get out of them. Though, like I said, it's not clear to me why it matters if they have sovereignty over the Howd region, because they graze there anyway. It's their traditional grazing land, and it's the Somali part of Ethiopia. So they've just been crossing during the there's no water there, so you can only graze your camels there, during the part where there's some small amount of rain in the desert or whatever.
Yeah.
So, you'd want to get some of these agreements out of them, but they really want international recognition, more than anything in the world. So they've made it pretty clear that it appears that they're, willing to do this. But of course, the only way you can find this stuff out is by actually opening negotiations, by saying, we're willing to consider recognizing you. We want to talk about, conditions that mean that this is going to create a more stable Horn of Africa, not a less stable Horn of Africa, that this is going to reduce piracy and terrorism, not increase it, that, all of these things like diplomacy, basically. So
Yeah,
we'll
which
see what threatening.
legitimizes them a little bit
Oh, yeah,
already.
having the
Just having the
conversations at all.
talks
Yes, you're correct.
legitimizes them.
I mean, and the lower level people are definitely in contact with them. You know, Somaliland does have its lobbyists in DC. Somalia itself hired lobbyists to try to stop Trump from recognizing them, which, you know, Somalia probably paid for that with money that we gave them in the first place, if we're being
Yeah,
honest.
I'm gonna go to the other comment above this because it's interesting. But while we're on this topic, because of corruption, that's why they want to be a part of Somalia. Yeah, I mean that seems like it is to me. Obviously, from like a American perspective, it seems very clear that the right thing is for Somaliland to be recognized. But you know, that's not always what's the best practically, and I certainly don't understand it a lot.
Yeah, well, I
So
mean, once again, though, the one Somalia policy is a dismal failure.
yeah,
Very little has improved in the territory that is at least nominally governed by the Mogadishu government. And you know, it's been almost 35 years now since the fall of the Siad
yeah.
Barre regime. So, like, I don't know if, you know, they're usually willing to just keep doing these things forever for no good reason, because that is kind of how our government works. That's, you know, the big disruption Trump is causing is kind of not taking that attitude towards things. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens, but the Somalilanders themselves are very enthusiastic about their prospects.
It's yeah. Well, yeah, we'll see. I mean, Trump's a wild card. It's one of my least favorite things about him in a lot of ways. It's also a lot of fun, but it ends up very stupid sometimes. It reminds me of China, like the PRC was recognized, the PRC People's Republic, as opposed to Taiwan's actual name, which is Republic of China.
Yeah,
They were recognized in 1979, and I think
yeah.
the Chinese Civil War ended in 1950 when the communists fully took control of the mainland. But like, you know, not that it would be a one to one in stage of years, but like it becomes, and it's not as, you know, internationally relevant because that was China, which is huge, and
Well, also the nationalists
Somaliland is
showed up
small.
in Taiwan and slaughtered a bunch of the natives and just took over the place. Like, they're not even the ones that were
Yeah,
originally there, you know. And that's
yeah.
was hidden from the Americans the whole time.
Was it really hidden? They didn't know that.
Yeah, no. There's this book called "A Nation of Sheep" by this guy William Lederer, who's the one that wrote the Ugly American. He's kind of the one that came up with the idea for the Peace Corps, and he has this section in his book. A big part of his thesis is, you know, how Americans are completely ignorant about the world, and it leads to bad foreign policy decision making, basically.
Hmm.
And this is from 1960. He explains the whole story of what actually happened in what he calls Formosa at the time.
Right. That's what
And
the islands.
yeah, and that they, you know, it had been under Japanese rule for a long time
Yeah.
before the war.
And there was Chinese colonization before then, though.
Yeah, way before then. You know, they believe that Taiwan is where, like, the Polynesians took off from in the first place. I believe
Yeah.
that's still the current anthropological theory.
Yeah.
But
Austronesian people broadly.
yeah, but so yeah, the
Yeah.
Chinese, you know, had colonized it. Regardless, you know, yeah, the nationalists showed up and killed a bunch of the natives and took over the place. And yeah, Americans to this day still don't generally know that.
Yeah. Yeah. I only know it because of anthropology stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this person left this comment. I think this person is from Somaliland, actually. Whenever we do like a topic like this, I always get somebody who's from the actual place in the
I
comments because
I
of the
have a
words.
fair amount of followers from that person. I mean, I guess I don't know this particular person, but yeah, I have a fair amount of readers from both Somalia and Somaliland. Actually, I was really
Oh,
worried
cool.
that publishing this article, I would just get interminably caught in their own little inter-ethnic squabble or whatever. But
Yeah,
it
yeah,
didn't end up happening, actually, so that was fortunate.
yeah.
I was kind of like scared of publishing it for that
I bet
reason.
the ones following you are going to be pretty level-headed, you know.
Yeah, you know, it varies. I've been pretty critical of some of the Somaliland activists in the past for various reasons, and I like a lot of the Somalis that I have met or that I know on, you know, Twitter or whatever. But realistically, the more level-headed ones are aware that one way or another, it just simply is not realistic for the Mogadishu government to, especially when they're trying to have a strong central state, to be in control of Somaliland. It's simply not happening. And you know, they've been on bad relations forever. So like, almost no one in Somaliland's ever been to Mogadishu. No one in
Yeah.
Mogadishu's, been to Somaliland really.
Right. Right. And that over time grows the division. Like now it's been so long with North and South Korea, it's like very unlikely. Um, it would just be ridiculous. But yeah, I guess this person, I was thinking of the differences in culture, especially from large scale movement of people for integration. But at least for 1700 Syrians, and this is this is obviously a anecdotal experience of somebody who knows what's going on. I'm sure there's some sort of conflict, but of a clash of cultures. But this is cool. This guy from Syria enjoys. I guess he opened a restaurant.
I mean, you can kind of tell from talking to the Somalilanders that they have something of a cosmopolitan disposition and that they would love to have kind of more trade and obviously not, I don't know, like large scale immigration like we all fight about in the West.
Yeah.
They would kind of
If they're a trading people, that makes
yeah,
sense.
they would love to
it's
be
in their culture.
So this is another thing that we didn't really get into that I kind of meant to at the beginning is that Somalia has always been both on the trade routes of the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. So that and, like Yemen and Oman and whatnot were where a lot of those goods would be transferred or whatever. But, northern Somaliland was more historically was in the Egyptian sphere of influence. But what is Somalia, the rest of it was more under the Omani Zanzibaris. I don't know if you know this, but the Sultan of Zanzibar, who was like the biggest power in East Africa from like slave trading, was from the Omani royal family. It was like a cadet branch of it. They ended up moving their kind of royal house to Zanzibar. And so he was like the big one there. And so they were all, involved in the Indian Ocean trade and everyone else. That's who the British nominally bought the coast of Kenya from or leased it from or whatever you want to call it. So, they've been much more so than most of sub-Saharan Africa. They've really been involved in in Mediterranean and Indian culture for forever. Actually one of my favorite like alternative history ideas is that Cleopatra and Antony tried to flee to the Red Sea to like leave the wars of the Mediterranean, but they got like caught and turned back. So you can like imagine them showing up in like Mogadishu because Mogadishu was a city at the time already. Yeah. You can imagine, them showing up with all of their attendants or whatever, like way more advanced, and this just crazy total alternative history where, the like Egyptians and Romans kind of end up there taking it over and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, it's always been much more connected to international trade than a lot of the rest of Africa was for 2,500, 3,000, 4,000 years or whatever. And I mean, also the Chinese treasure fleets made it to Mogadishu on the 5th voyage.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I know it was a significant city back then. I'm kind of struck by this picture here. It's like this, they have like this could be in America.
Yeah.
You see it? It's like they have legitimate like tile on the wall. He's got professional cooking equipment, like all electricity, nice tables. Seems like good food safety stuff. Like I'm a little bit surprised.
Somaliland is very poor. A lot of people living out, in the desert and whatnot. But Hargeisa is actually a surprisingly developed city, at least in the nicer parts of it. There, new homes get built that look like they could be in Phoenix or something. Like, wow. So parts of it are nice, even though it's really poor. I would assume that a lot of those people are, kind of like foreign educated and, have money from wherever else. I mean, I don't think it's that big of a part of the population, but they build a lot of stuff there. Like the Berbera port is new. It's like, it was updated and made extensive and modern and everything 10, 15 years ago.
What are we wrong about? That looks like a American flag. Shaking hands with a Somalian or a Somaliland flag.
Yeah, I don't know.
But you can tell us if we're wrong about something, please.
Yeah, regardless, some parts of it are really remarkably modern and very nice. But overall, the average income in the country is still very low.
Yeah, the reason I'm surprised is because you said average income $800 a day, even if
850 according to Somaliland.
I'm sorry, government. A year.
Yeah, that's according to Somaliland's government, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. And that, of course, those numbers of income, they're not going to include like they're already not going to include like domestic tasks, but a lot of the economy, the real economy, is going to be missed in that. If you're like, if you have a camel and you're drinking camel's milk, that would be an
Yeah.
asset producing a good, but it's not going to get
Yeah, I mean,
tallied
it's
that
it's
way.
definitely like that across, across pretty much all of Africa. That
Yeah, and a lot of
you
other parts of the world
we
too.
think of it as trying to budget your entire life off of like $2 a day, but in reality, you know, they're doing subsistence, agriculture, and stuff like that for a lot of the actual food that they eat in many parts of Africa.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Yeah, it's crazy how much that idea of how we live gets like completely like it's like the only way of thinking. People are often like unable to, or they just don't know how to think about it outside of those terms because their entire life is that they buy basically everything. A lot of people don't even have chickens anymore.
Well, yeah, and
Um,
even you even stuff written say in like
yeah,
19th century France or whatever. It's pretty amazing the extent to which I'll respond to him in 1 second,
you
but
don't have to stop for the comments. You
the
can
extent to
keep
which
going.
the poor people in there, they would have almost no money all the time. They're used to living without money. If they get money, I don't know, they spend it on alcohol or whatever. They're like think it's normal that like one meal every other day. You'll see if you read Hugo or whatever, it's like that. Anyway, regarding that comment about it not being recognized, I would say that's definitely is a component of it, and that is a big part of the reason they want recognition. You get better trade deals. It's difficult when your government's not recognized. You might have other states that say like, hey, your meat's not been properly certified by an internationally recognized body, or any number of things like that. That come up when you're not recognized. That's is a major one of the challenges they face, and that's definitely part of why they want to be recognized. It is, however, just it's a very harsh like land and climate and stuff like that too, though. Like some land's easier to get by on, and Somaliland is not a natural environment that is prone to a lot of prosperity. One thing they do have like the like the frankincense and myrrh and some other like valuable commodities, and there is a lot of value in camels, especially in that region where people use it a lot. But it's not somewhere that you can get a lot of plantation agriculture to develop your economy. They do have some prospects of oil development that would really help them, but
Sure,
overall
maybe.
they need better trade agreement. They need the ability to trade more. So that
I'm
really is a
wondering how
major
they even
challenge they face.
got these products. Like, I know they're not manufacturing them there. So,
Oh,
like, where
okay,
do
so
they
I mean,
get this?
firstly, like, they're not under embargo or anything. So, like, I mean,
Yeah.
they are able to trade to a great extent on a person-to-person level, and they do maintain. I mean, for one thing, they can trade with some of the neighboring countries. They do sell meat and some other stuff like that to the Arabian Peninsula. So, I mean, yeah, if you look on Google Maps, their port is getting tonnage of containers. You can see that there are big modern. It's a modern port. They're getting the full boxcar sized containers into their port. So they do have a degree of trade, but it would be much. They could get a lot more trade, yeah, if they were able to make more like standard trade agreements like countries tend to have with each other.
Yeah. Do you know if they have? I tried to look it up and I couldn't. But do you know if they have like anything in Qatar, which seems to have diplomats from a bunch of unrecognized and like terrorist type? Not that Somaliland is terrorist,
I
but
think Qatar's kind of on the other side of things. I think they do a fair amount of their international business through the UAE, which is a very influential country throughout this whole region, especially in finance and business. But I could be wrong about that. I don't particularly know anything about if
hmm.
Somaliland maintains relations with Qatar though.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Anything else you want to cover, or are we good on this?
No, I think that was a pretty in-depth conversation. I would be happy to I don't know, answer questions people have, but you said you are out of questions, so
Yeah.
no, that's probably fine.
Cool. Yeah. Somaliland. I like it. Their flag is like what strikes me about this is this color scheme. The red, yellow, and it's kind of small, but the red, yellow, like this like Ethiopian color scheme you see on a lot of maps, a lot of flags in Africa, like this combination of colors.
Yeah.
And then the blue, white, and green I've seen other places, but then theirs is green, white, and red, which is very like Middle Eastern style.
Yeah,
What's
I
up
mean
with
that's
that?
true. And then Somalia has the unusual flag that's just blue with the one star.
Yeah, and they all kind of have a five-pointed star though.
Yeah, and once again, I said that like that originally symbolizes the five different regions, what they call like regions where Somalis were living, which
Yeah.
was just how the borders were broken up. Actually, there was a great quote about how I don't know, the Somalis kept expanding wherever until kind of colonialism stopped them and then bottled them into where they were. But I couldn't actually find where I had it was in one of the books that I read. I couldn't find it for my article. But
Hmm.
regardless, yeah, that represents them, you know, their people being broken up by the various colonial powers and whatnot that, you know, yeah, put them into five different, or at a time and under five different colonial powers. Well, four colonial powers in Ethiopia.
Yeah. Interesting. And then, the Italians in Ethiopia eventually, but that wasn't really full colonialism. And then I'm
Yeah.
looking at
Also, technically,
Djibouti's.
now that I say that, three colonial powers because it was Somaliland and Kenya were both the UK, but you get the idea.
Oh, okay. Right.
They're just very far separate from each other.
Yeah. Djibouti's flag is also the blue, white, and green color scheme. I wonder what that is. And it's interesting to me that Somaliland's is green, white, and red, which is like
I
all the
read it at
Mediterranean
some point.
countries.
I'm not great with remembering this kind of symbolism. I mean, I think the blue is the ocean, though I would guess, but I'm
Well,
not really sure.
it's a beautiful color for a flag.
Yeah,
I think. And the blue and the green. It's also that's what Cascadia, the flag
yeah,
of
it is.
like a
That's
lot of
true.
them. Yeah. And Cascadia, by the way, is like it's a region of the US and Canada. It's like parts of British Columbia. Well, depending on who you ask,
It has a
it's
not very serious secessionist movement that has a flag
yeah,
with a pine tree on it, and Sasquatch is the national animal.
it is a cool flag, and Sasquatch is good as a mythical creature of the native people of the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, he's really
Um,
really widely believed in around here
I'm sure it is.
because
Yeah.
tons of people have seen him.
Yeah.
Oh, as far as what made me want to cover the Somaliland story, I actually write about Africa a fair amount, primarily just because it's really interesting
Yeah.
and there's always something going on in Africa. So I had been following what was going on in Somaliland for some time, but I hadn't written about it. I did write something about Somalia some time ago. Um, and then I was just interested in the premise that Donald Trump might recognize it and seeing that they had really high hopes for that. So I decided it was worth writing about.
Yeah. Yeah, by the way, for those of you who don't know Brad, he comes on every once in a while to do geopolitics stuff, and it's usually Africa. That tends to be what you specialize in, right?
I mean, I write about a lot of different things. I usually end up in here talking about Africa with you because that's kind of what you were interested in as well.
Yeah.
But there's, you know, I was following the story of the collapse of like Franco-American influence in the Sahel really closely. I mean, and that story for the time being kind of ended because they both lost and are gone now. So I haven't overall found another story, you know, in Africa that I'm covering as closely as that. I actually have an article. I have an assignment to write a shorter article about the situation in the Eastern DRC for a magazine. But no,
The
it's just
Eastern DRC. Good lord.
it's really just the case that once I started writing about Africa, I became really obsessed with the continent because it's very, very interesting.
Yeah. There's always more layers you can go down, man. It's
And it's
crazy.
yeah, well, it's huge and it's really, really diverse. And there's a bunch of
Yeah.
countries that it's a strange thing that the countries like they're in many ways really unique from each other, but they've all had in many ways very, very similar problems and trajectories and whatnot. So yeah, I
Mm.
end up writing about Africa a lot. There's really a shortage of good content on Africa as well,
Yeah,
especially
that's
that
why
is
I like it. I follow a bunch of people in
made
Africa.
so that
In Africa.
Americans can, you know, explain in a way that Americans can kind of try to understand what's going on.
Yeah, it does. It just doesn't get brought up in American media, and even when I talk about it, it's like it's obviously I don't generally do geopolitics stuff, so it's like less relevant to my channel in a lot of ways, but it's still like secondarily related, and I think it's important, and I wish there was more of a demand for it, but I guess it's just not as consequential
You know, my
for
stories
Americans.
about the collapse of French influence did really surprisingly well. I think because there were a lot of anti-imperialist type people that wanted to read them or were interested in that. My other stories on Africa that were not related to France have not done nearly as well.
Yeah, and that's it's all right. It makes sense. In some ways, just based on like cultural connections that we have. But all right, man. I'll link to your Substack down below. Do you want me to link anything else?
Oh, just my Twitter page would be great.
Okay, and I'll do that, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming.